I think the core message that I would like to get across is how important it is to listen to each other. I feel like that has been such a casualty of this time, and unfortunately, there's a lot of forces at play that are really pulling us away from being able to hear each other and listen, even across difference.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Indivisible Mid-Peninsula's Courage is Contagious podcast. Today, we have the great pleasure of having Elizabeth Chur. Elizabeth is a swing left San Francisco volunteer, a canvasser, and a freelance medical writer. She's the author of The Joy of Talking Politics with Strangers, How to Save Democracy One Conversation at a Time. She's trained more than 2,500 volunteers nationally through 3 acclaimed workshops: phone bank and canvassing training for introverts and friends, Spanish for activists, and You and the 34%, How to Have Meaningful Conversations with High Potential Voters. Additionally, as a co-host today, we have Jacki Yahn. She's an architect, a professor at the College of San Mateo, and co-chair of Indivisible Mid-Peninsula's training and events team. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So obviously, democracy is a very important concept. And unfortunately, we're at a time in history where it's being challenged in the United States. And I know one of your great passions, Elizabeth, is a commitment to democracy and helping strengthen it.
Well, thank you both for having me on. It's such an honor to be here. And I would love to talk today about my kind of entree into activism, which was not necessarily your traditional route, and what I've discovered about how fulfilling it can be to talk with strangers, talk with voters about politics, which is something I never imagined myself doing. And also for folks who maybe aren't doing that, maybe some possible places to start in that work.
That would be awesome. I can attest, I'm one of those people that did not think talking about politics was joyful. I had little, if any, activism around democracy or politics before February of this year. Mm-hmm. So I was pretty elated to see your book, The Joy of Talking Politics with Strangers, and I've started reading it. It would be so amazing if we could create an environment, a nation where it was exciting to talk about politics in a positive way. How do you help people do that?
Absolutely. Well, I have to say, I did a little bit of phone banking before 2016. Like every 4 years for a presidential election, I would do maybe an afternoon of phone banking, and I would be so scared and totally nervous, but it did feel like I was doing my part. And then I felt like, I would just check that off the list. And I figured other people that were far more qualified would be going out there and knocking on doors and doing really the heavy lifting of making that more of a focus. And I just felt like they knew more than I did. They'd be better equipped to answer questions, and they were more knowledgeable, and that they were the experts and they would take care of it. And it was a huge wake-up call in 2016, obviously, with the results of that election. And I realized that it's really up to all of us. Our democracy is ours for the saving, really, and that no one else is going to do that work for us. And so many elections are decided on such small margins. And it's not only presidential elections, but we have statewide elections in Virginia this fall. Those races are often decided by just a handful of votes or even a coin toss in one case. And so it's really important, I think, this one-to-one kind of dialogue that we can engage in. And it, to me, is really democracy at its finest, beyond all the sound bites and the negative advertising and, the debates and all the polarization, but to just be able to talk with people one-on-one, and not only to tell them what I think, but really, I think the core message that I would like to get across is how important it is to listen to each other. I feel like that has been such a casualty of this time, and unfortunately, there's a lot of forces at play that are really pulling us away from being able to hear each other and listen, even across difference. And I think that it is so important for the future of our democracy to be able to break through all of that noise and really create a space that we can hear each other's concerns, we can share our values, our hopes for the future. And I have seen countless times how that can help to shape people's decisions about whether they think voting is worth it, whether they think that voting for particular candidates is going to make a difference. And that is something, there's a magic in one-to-one conversations. It's one of the oldest forms of communication we have, long before the internet, long before broadcast. We were talking with each other, and I think it's time to loop back to that and to really center that as a way to kind of repair the frayed fabric of our democracy.
Yeah,
So,
I just want to add to that. So, I just want to say Elizabeth inspired me years ago to do I did knocking on doors and phone banking, and I attended one of her trainings at Swing Left. But I will say that whole component of the listening, because we were always given a script of what to say. And when you take that pause and you ask someone what they really care about or what matters, suddenly someone's not hanging up the phone. People need to have a conversation and they need to be heard and respected. And even if we don't agree, I can smile and say, have a great day. And when we show up with a smile and wishing them well, we're clearly showing we believe in democracy and we care about what they want too.
so it's just nice to be able to have that skill of being able to talk to someone and also to listen to someone.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me has also been, yes, I am there to share some information about what's at stake in the election and how the candidate that I'm supporting or the issues that I'm supporting could make a difference for that person. But also, I think it's very important to remember that this is a dialogue. And that is why I titled my book The Joy of Talking Politics with Strangers, not to strangers. That this is not where I'm not like a missionary coming to convert people. I'm actually there to be able to listen as well as to speak. And one of the chapters in my book is called 80% them, 20% me. And it's very intentional because, like Jackie said, I think a lot of the scripts that we have, it's just about talking at people, and understandably people are turned off. I'm a stranger, they don't know who I am, maybe I've interrupted something in their life. I wouldn't want to listen to someone that just barges in and starts spewing stuff at me. So I really encourage people when they engage in these conversations to come with a listening spirit and to come with an attitude of non-judgmental curiosity, friendly non-judgmental curiosity. It's a little bit like, if you had new neighbors move in next door and you wanted to get to know them, I would ask them questions about where are you from? Why did you choose to move here? What do you do? And that kind of approach, rather than coming and just preaching at people, seems to work a lot better. And I do think that it's important that not only am I there to share information, but I also am there hopefully to come away changed in some way, that I learned things that I would never have learned if I just stayed in my little bubble and continued living my life like isolated from other people in the community. And it's been such a privilege to be able to get a glimpse into what other people, what they struggle with, what they hope for, what kind of circumstances they live in. I've lived in California almost my whole life. I was born and raised here, and I had never spent time in California's Central Valley except to drive through on my way to somewhere else. And by now I've probably spent maybe 2 or 3 months of my life there, knocking doors, when you add it all up, and really getting to understand, what does rural poverty look like? What does it mean if you have kidney failure and you need dialysis and you live in a small community and you don't have a car and you need to spend 3 hours getting to Bakersfield for your dialysis treatment, and then, 3 hours back 3 times a week? What does that mean? What does it mean when 2 of your 6 children have these really unusual birth defects, probably from your chemical exposure in the field because of all the pesticides that are used? I mean, these are things that I wouldn't necessarily have thought about, but the ways that our policies and what's happening on the macro level are affecting people's lives, their everyday lives, their livelihoods, the health of themselves and their families. And I have felt like this has been one of the greatest educational experiences of my life. So it's a real privilege to go, not just to share information, but also to learn and to observe. And I think in some ways it's been just morally a really important piece of understanding more about how policy and politics affect the lives of my fellow citizens here.
What inspired you to write The Joy of Talking Politics with Strangers?
Well, like I said, I started out as a rather reluctant activist myself, and I started phone banking in 2017 and then canvassing in 2018. And in 2020, some colleagues of mine and I from Swing Left San Francisco were going to teach a class called Canvassing for Introverts. And I think our first class was going to be something like March 18th, 2020. And we all know what happened that month. We had the shutdown. And so we quickly had to pivot to doing phone banking for introverts and friends. And we were able to teach about 1,500 people, I think, through that class and other workshops like Spanish for Activists, which was amazing. And I also, when it was safe to do so, I was able to go canvass again, and I spent a month in the Central Valley in 2022 knocking doors, and that was incredible. I mean, I thought I was a pretty good canvasser. I started canvassing in 2018, but to do it full time, it was like being in a language immersion program where my skills just went up exponentially because I was doing it every day and learning from my mistakes. And so I actually sat down, I think in 2023, and thought, oh, maybe I'll write an essay about all the things that I learned, especially from this intensive month in the Central Valley. And I think I spent maybe like 2 or 3 hours putting together my notes, and I realized with a mix of elation and terror that I had way too many things I wanted to say. It was not going to fit in an essay, and that really I needed to write a book. So that was sort of the initial spark for the book. And I think, I've loved teaching the workshops, and I continue to do those. But I also think it's nice to have some of that information and those suggestions in written form, because a training, you attend it and then it's over and it's done. And hopefully, my goal is if people leave a training and they remember one or two things that I said, that's like a huge success, But with the book, I think it's nice because you can go back, and I have certain chapters in this book, like I have a whole chapter just about gear, like what to bring when you go canvassing, or even phone banking. What are some of the tools that I use for that? And it's nice to have that just as a reference. So I kind of think of it almost like a cookbook, where you're not necessarily going to memorize these recipes, but when you're going to make that dish, you can go look up that chapter. So I have a whole chapter on like Spanish for activists, with phrases in there. And I have a whole chapter on how to talk to people who say, I don't vote. What do you do in that situation? So I felt like having the book would be a different way of getting the information out there that was shareable. And also was hoping maybe to reach people that didn't already know about the workshops. So that was kind of the genesis for writing this book.
And what do you hope people take from reading the book?
I hope that people see that talking politics with strangers is not only really important for the future of democracy, but can also be fun. And I know that's not something that people normally think about when they think about either knocking on the doors of strangers or cold calling strangers. But that I have really found that there is an indescribable joy that comes with making a connection with another person who is completely outside my social circle, who I probably would never have crossed paths with in my normal life. But it is an immense privilege to be able to get a glimpse into their life, to make a connection. And part of what I encourage people to do, instead of just trying to say, well, my name is Elizabeth and I'm a volunteer at the Democratic Party, and can we count on your vote for so-and-so? I mean, that's how these scripts usually go. And I really like to start out a conversation much more conversational. My name is Elizabeth Chur. I'm a volunteer with the Democratic Party, and I'm calling on behalf of candidate so-and-so. And they would like us to reach out to every person in the district to ask, if you were in charge of the country, what 2 or 3 things would you change? I mean, right off the bat, start with an open-ended question. People sometimes in training say, oh, they're not going to answer that. You would be surprised how many people do answer that. And especially, I feel like sometimes people, they're never asked for their opinion. We're just asking for their vote. But I think it's far richer to really dig into what is important for them. Sometimes people draw a blank and they say, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, well, if you were in an elevator with the president for 2 minutes, what would you tell them? Or if you were running the country, what's the first thing that you would change? And it's just an incredible experience to be able to ask the question and then to listen to their response. And I have to tell you, sometimes people will go on for 15 or 20 minutes about all the things they would change. And not only is it interesting, but I think there is an element of strategic listening and empathy, because all the while I am mentally taking notes. And if I'm phone banking, I'm physically writing down a few notes about the top things that they care about. Because when I get a better sense of what keeps them up at night, what they're really concerned about for themselves, their families, it really helps me then later in the conversation to loop back to that and to connect what they care about specifically to what's at stake in the election, and what how this candidate or this proposal, like a ballot proposition, will directly impact the things that they care about most. Because it doesn't really matter what I think in these conversations or what the laundry list of talking points are, but it's most important to really hear them and then match that with things to like address their pain points, rather than just a one size fits all kind of conversation. And that approach has been incredibly successful. I found people get excited, and even people, I have talked to many people who have never voted in their entire lives. And by the end of our conversation, they have committed to vote. And some of them say that they are going to bring family members with them to the polls, or they've agreed to tell 3 friends about it, or they have agreed to take a lawn sign. And to me, to be a part of that transformation in the course of a conversation is an immense privilege. Some people may remember back in 2017 in the House of Delegates election in the state of Virginia. They have statewide elections in odd numbered years. And so in 2017, there was a woman named Shelley Simons, and she was running for the House of Delegates, which is like our state assembly in Virginia. And after a recount, it was super close with her and her Republican opponent, super close. And after a recount and all this, it was a dead heat. They were exactly tied. And the way that election was decided was that they put each of their names into a ceramic bowl, like in these little old school film canisters, and they pulled out one name. And guess what? The Republican won the draw. So he was elected to the position. And not only that, but the Republicans were able to maintain control, because it was like almost tied. And so that election sealed it so that Republicans maintained control of the House of Delegates for another 2 years. So, and I got to meet Shelley Simons when I was at a conference outside of DC earlier this year. And I told her how much that story sticks with me. And when it's hard, and when I'm in the middle of a conversation, I have to tell you, oftentimes when I'm talking with voters and, they have a lot of passion and feeling, or they might feel really turned off by politics. And, and I'm listening takes a lot of work, and to be patient. But in the back of my head, I'm thinking this could be that one vote, that would have put Shelley Simons over the top. And she told me at that conference that every year she has at least one person come up to her, and in a hushed voice with kind of a downcast look, they tell her, "It was me. It was me. I didn't vote in 2017. And if I had voted, you would have won." And they felt guilty. So it's really interesting how, in retrospect, sometimes people can see the value of their vote, but sometimes in the abstract, it's hard to really think that one vote makes a difference. And I would say also, a lot of my friends are on the same page politically. I would say probably the vast majority are not. And for them, it is hard to conceive of not. I think the same thing is true for doing voter engagement. Yes, it can be challenging sometimes to knock on doors or make phone calls to strangers. And yes, I get hung up occasionally. And yes, sometimes people are annoyed that I'm bothering them. But just like it's hard for them to imagine that some people don't vote, it's actually a little hard to imagine that more people aren't getting involved in getting out the vote right now, when it is so incredibly important. And many studies have shown that this is the most effective way to boost our turnout for Democrats, is to knock on doors. That's the very most effective way. And the second most effective way is to phone bank. And sometimes people say, like, I did a book reading in Virginia, and I went canvassing for a little while before the book reading. And then it was great because some of my fellow canvassers came to that book reading afterwards. And one person during the Q&A said, "Yeah, like, I knocked doors all afternoon and I only had one good conversation." I'm like, "Okay, can I just pause you for a minute? You had one good conversation." And I reminded him of that story of Shelley Simons, that one conversation could decide not only that specific race, but the balance of power, in the House of Delegates. And it's really important that this is, I think, how we're going to win elections a lot of the time. It's one voter at a time. It's one conversation at a time. It is not glamorous. It is not like quote unquote efficient in that way. It can be a lot of hard work, but it can be incredibly effective. And I have to say, the thing that I found is that the process can be unbelievably satisfying. When I talk with someone and they have committed to vote when they haven't voted in the last 8 or 10 years, or they've never voted in their entire lives. And I know, and the other thing that's really amazing is this year I tried something different. I was canvassing in the Central Valley in the same small town for about 2.5 weeks. So I made a short list of people that I had quality conversations with, the ones that started out saying, I don't vote. Like right out of the gate, I opened the door, like, I don't vote. And then 20 minutes later, like, okay, I'm going to vote. Yes. And I'll tell my kids, I'll tell them how important it is. And, I was like, that was a great conversation. And I felt really uplifted. But I also am interested in results, like what were the outcomes? So I circled back to a short list of about 6 or 7 of those households. A couple people weren't home. One guy, his mom said that his truck broke down on the way from home from work, so he couldn't vote. But the other 3 or 4 people that I did make contact with, they all had voted. And several of them had brought multiple family members with them, like adult children or their spouses. So that conversation, even if I spent 20, 30, 40 minutes with a voter, and I was wondering multiple times during that time, is this even worth it? But I figure if people have not shut the door in my face, they're being respectful. They might have a lot of opinions, or they might be upset about something, but they're not angry at me. There's a lot going on for them, and they've been disappointed in the past, but they're still talking to me. To me, it's worth it to provide listening ear and to help them kind of think through this and think about the big picture, and to actually then go back and confirm that conversation helped to influence the results of their choice to decide to vote is it is like just such a huge dopamine hit for me. And I think that it is such an antidote to the doom scrolling and the terrible fire hose of bad news that's coming out every day. And I think it's so important to realize that we have the power to connect with our fellow Americans in this way. And it is something that, all the negative ads in the world can't replace, is this one-to-one connection. Because the ads, they can make people scared and angry, but they can't say, tell me more about that. And they can't ask people, to be my thought partner in this. Like, let's talk about this. Let's explore some of the reasons why you think this could be done better. If you had to decide today whether or not to vote, like on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to vote? Oh, you're a 2. Well, why isn't that a 0 or a 1? Tell me more about that. Oh, because your cousin thinks it's really important, you respect her. And well, what would make your 2 like a 3 or a 4? And they might say, well, if I had more information, what kind of information? Then I might be able to offer that to them, or I might be able to connect them with someone at the campaign that could address specific questions that I don't know about. So these are all things that in a dialogue, in a one-to-one conversation, that back and forth, that interchange, that rich conversation, that's something that we can offer that, mass media just can't touch. And I have to say that obviously right now we're facing so many challenges in this country. And, don't get me wrong, I have my days where I feel overwhelmed and sad about everything that's going on. But I have to tell you that this kind of work really helps me feel like I'm not helpless, that I can do something. And no, I can't do everything. I'm not going to single-handedly save this country, but none of us is. I mean, I think that collectively, if each of us are reaching out to people, both, within our networks that we have, but also I think there is a place that's really important to talk with people that we don't know, because oftentimes I think those folks are not necessarily going to be hearing a voice like ours, who's asking and gently inquiring and really interested in their priorities. And I think that we can provide that. And I think also as volunteers, this is really important. I mean, yes, there are a lot of really committed campaign staffers. They work so hard. I mean, I have had the privilege of meeting many of them, and wow, I could not do what they're doing at the level they're doing, like for the amount of time they're doing. And that is essential. And I think as volunteers, we do have this superpower, because we're not getting paid, so they can't afford to necessarily spend half an hour talking with a voter who says, I don't vote. They've got like another 49 doors to knock that day. But I can spend that time. I think somebody's got to spend the time if we want to have a chance of bringing those folks into the fold. And why not me? Why not take that time if that person is actually willing to engage with me? And I think this really is, we're going to have to work for this. We can't just expect that younger people are going to vote for us, or working class people are going to vote for us, or people of color are going to vote. We've seen that just sort of passive, like we're just going to somehow like age into the the era of the Democratic Party. I don't think is going to happen. I think we're going to have to be strategic. We have to work hard. And I think we really need to reach out to the folks that aren't voting at all right now, because in the 2020 election, 34% of eligible voters did not vote in that election, which is astounding given how close that election was, that 43,000 voters nationwide in key swing states, they decided the outcome of that election. That's not very many people when you think of the entire country. But when you think about a third of the electorate did not cast a ballot at all, we cannot afford to ignore those voters. And sure, not all of them are going to vote. Not all of them are necessarily going to vote for the Democratic Party, but some portion of them, I think if we take the time to engage with them, can be encouraged to connect their motivations with what's at stake in the election. And I think we can't afford to leave those votes on the table. And those are some of my favorite voters to talk with, to talk with. And I'll just say one other thing that a big learning from this last cycle was I was asked to canvass not just for the congressional candidate, but also for a local candidate for community college board. And at first, to be honest, I thought, oh man, I got to canvass for 2 people. That's a lot to, like, okay, but that's what they asked me to do, so I'll do it. And what I found, which to my surprise, was that candidate actually grew up in the town where I was canvassing. A lot of people knew her parents because they worked like at the flower warehouse where they're packing flowers, and had a good reputation. She had 2 small children, and on her platform, she wanted to bring more vocational training into the community and to build a campus right there in town so people didn't have to drive half an hour to the nearest satellite campus, and to bring training programs, because right now in the Central Valley, a lot of these people coming right out of high school, their options are they can go work in agriculture, for $15 an hour, or they can go work like in the oil fields. And that's pretty much it. And, it's great that there are jobs, but, oftentimes those jobs don't have benefits, they're not getting pensions. It's a really hard way. It's very physical labor, and it's not something that people can necessarily do, till they're 65. And so she wanted to bring in training programs like nursing programs, computer programming, graphic design, just lots of different jobs that require a higher level skill. The trades, electrician, plumber. She was saying, how come when we build these new buildings, why are we bringing all these people in from LA? We should be hiring people locally, but we can't find enough people with the training. But if we train them up here in our community college system, then they can go right into a union job, start paying into their pension in their 20s, not have to wait until some spot opens up maybe 10 or 20 years from now. And I got to tell you, every single person I talked to was like, that sounds like a great idea. I actually had one guy, he came to the door, and I was there to talk with his sister, but she was out of town. So I said, well, what about you? Another chapter in my book is called Talk to the One in Front of You. So even if the voter themselves is not home, if they're a live body, I will talk to them. I can say, can you pass this message along? And with this young man, he was really cynical, and he's like, I don't get involved with that voting stuff. They're all just corrupt and rah. And but I told him, I'm like, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. Sometimes I'm a little turned off by some politicians as well, but can we just take it really local? Just set aside national politics. And I told him about this local candidate for a community college board, and he was like, wow, I could get on board with that. I said, if you voted and the only vote you cast was for this community college board candidate, it would be worth it. He wasn't ready to commit, but he said, you've given me a lot to think about, and it's the first time I've ever really seriously thought about voting. So to me, that was a win. Because a lot of times these conversations, it's not just a once and done thing, but maybe I just got him thinking about questions that he wouldn't have thought about. And maybe the next time someone knocks on that door, they can continue that conversation. And so it's really a relay. I think that's why it's important to start early and to be willing to get more people involved. And I think one of the critiques that people have sometimes, they're like, yeah, Elizabeth, that's great that you can do that, but we don't have enough people. There are so many doors to knock, there's so many calls to make that we can't afford to spend that much time. And my answer to that is, first of all, I think that this deeper approach really works if we want transformational results. So not just the people that are going to vote anyway. I mean, it's nice to talk with them, but I don't necessarily think I'm moving the needle with those folks. But for the people who have never voted or are really skeptical, it's going to take more time. And the second thing is, it's not just me, but what if we could get like 10 times as many people involved or 100 times many people involved, like volunteers, that we would have like an abundance of people power to be able to have these conversations. Yeah, sure, I alone, none of us alone can make or break something. That's not really the point, but collectively our power is really immense. And I think if we got more people involved, more people who are willing to at least try it for the first time, and we would be able to have that level of kind of volunteer staffing to really invest in these conversations, which I think can be transformational and I think are really a very important piece of the way forward in terms of building support for democratic priorities that, again, I think we need to work for it, and that takes time and effort.
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking about making connections, which is what we need. I've heard a lot of criticism that the Democratic Party is completely out of touch with Americans. Frankly, I think the Republican Party is as well. But, and then you mentioned the importance of the local elections and the local things that are happening, which are so much more important many times than the national stuff.
Well, I would say that they're all important, at different levels. And I think the beauty a lot of times is that we don't have to choose. A lot of times there's like a school board election, there's a county supervisors, there's mayor, congressional and Senate
And going back to the feeling of satisfaction, I did have one event that I did phone banking and canvassing. Our schools are really outdated. We needed new schools. It was a big hot topic in our local area. I didn't have any idea what I was doing, but I just trusted the process. And now, years later, I'm seeing the schools being built. I'm seeing the schools being improved. My daughter this year gets to go into a brand new gym for her school. That was a result of something that I had a hand in helping with,
Yes.
So it's just so satisfying every time I drive by the new school or the new gym or the construction. It's just really, really nice.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that both voters and just, the general population, us as volunteers, needs to see, is that the government is really us. I really think the collective power of all of us acting together is stronger than any one person can be. And I think just like our democracy, we do need to work for that. I mean, we're seeing there's a lot of attempts to take that away by fiat right now. But we still have a lot of power as individuals. And I think it's more important than ever. I know personally to go outside my comfort zone, and to take measured risks. I mean, and I think sometimes these times are calling us to go outside of our comfort zone. But we don't need to do it alone.
Can you tell us about your to democracy trainings?
So Committed to Democracy is an all-volunteer group that I worked with this summer, and I did a series of 3 workshops with them. Like the introverts training was sort of an intro class about how to help people get over the hump of just trying it for the first time. And then the second workshop was specifically how to respond to people who say, I don't vote. And that was my You and the 34% workshop, how to have meaningful conversations with high potential voters. And then the third workshop was actually something new for me, because we had so many requests for people who asked, well, how do I talk to my, my uncle who voted for Trump, thanks. And, I'll be honest, I have less experience with that personally than I do in the first two categories. But because it's such a frequently asked question, we decided to put on a workshop. And my collaborator in that, Carol Blaney, who's one of the volunteer trainers with Commit to Democracy, and I put that together. And it was really illuminating because, I think, well, first I'll say, I think it is important that we keep talking to our beloved family members, our friends that may have different political beliefs than we do. And I think it's also really important to remember that it's not our job to change their minds. And I know that sounds like heresy, that somehow that we need to find the magic words to make people see the light and see it our way. But if those words exist, I haven't found them yet. But I think it's important to stay in respectful dialogue with people. And a lot of that in that workshop, it's like all the same things that I've talked about before with engaging with people who say, I don't vote. But you got to double down on that, even more listening. Tell me more about that. A lot of reflection. It sounds like you're saying X, Y, Z. It's what I'm hearing that you say, it sounds like it's really a priority. So maybe I'll tell you just a story about that if we have time for that.
We have all the time that you want.
Okay. All right. Get comfortable.
I don't know, Jacki, what's your
I
timeline?
love it. I love it. But I just wanted to say, when I signed up to knock on doors, I didn't know a lot of the issues, but I think the thing for getting people out, and I just want you to respond to this, is that even if you don't know, some person's bringing up an issue, you don't have what you would hope to have as a reply. You can say, I'm going to look into that and circle back with you. I'm going to look. That's a great point. So can you just speak to that? Because I think there's I guess, cohort of my friends who don't feel knowledgeable enough and are afraid to go knock on those doors because of that.
Absolutely. And I should have addressed that in the beginning, because I think one of the myths about canvassing and phone banking is that somehow I need to be all knowing, which, that would disqualify all of us right off the bat. You often get like a fact sheet before you go out with some basic talking points that are just the platform of the candidate. But there are many times when people ask me, they ask me about like specific, really granular aspects of water policy. I don't know the answer to that, but I say, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to it, but I can look into it for you. I can refer them to the candidate's website, but I like to be more proactive and also like out in the field or even on a phone bank. If they're willing, I'll say, I'm just a volunteer, but I work with the campaign staff and they're much more knowledgeable about policy. Could I get your contact information? And when I find that out, I can get back to you. And then I do go research it and I follow up and I send them a text. Or if it seems like maybe they want to have a discussion about that because it's really important to them, I'll ask them, would it be okay for the campaign staff to reach out to you? And then I make darn sure that I follow up with them. So we're definitely not asked to know everything in advance. And I think the other myth is that we are being sent out to talk with MAGA Republicans who are going to yell at us all day. And there are so many Democrats to talk with and undecided folks that if people they love what's going on right now. I just say, thank you so much for letting me know. Have a great day. Goodbye. I am not asked to try to convince them to change their minds.
I think that brings up another important point. The small amount of time that I did the phone banking and canvassing, and I think this is a big misconception that can be cleared up for people. I thought I was going to have to go and try to change people's minds that had a completely different viewpoint. But when I showed up, it was actually, I was given a list of people who are registered Democrats. So you already assume there's going to be some shared philosophy there. And so they're not sending you into territory that could be dangerous or combative. Would you like to address that?
Absolutely.
Briefly?
I mean, I was shaking in my boots because that's sort of what I thought that canvassing was all about. But for the most part, like when you're canvassing, I'll just speak to that first because you're actually physically there, so that might feel more scary. But you have an app and you get a list of the addresses and the names of the people, and you get a little basic information like their party registration, their name, their age, and usually their gender. And so you have a little bit of a heads up. So if it's like a household with 5, Democratic voters, you're probably going to get a friendly to at least neutral reception. Whereas sometimes if there's a mixed household, like maybe the husband's a Republican and the wife is a Democrat or something like that, you can see that. And so you use your judgment. But I have to say, it's amazing. I think it's a lot easier for people to be rude online and maybe a little bit less so on the phone. I mean, a lot of people hang up, but usually it's just a hang up. Sometimes people are snarky, but I can deal with that. And if they get verbally abusive, I just hang up. I mean, there's no reason that you should engage in that kind of, you don't need to hear that. In person, I've had a couple people close the door in my face, but they weren't threatening me. When in doubt, just be safe. I just mark them not home and I move on because I have tons of other people to talk to. So I don't need that. And also, if you're just getting started, you can ask to be sent to like a heavily Democratic neighborhood and go with somebody else.
Can I ask you a couple of really quick questions?
Yeah, sure.
I got a chance to start listening to some of your training videos on YouTube. And one of the things you mentioned was motivational interviewing. And I'm wondering if you could just briefly talk about what that is and how that helps your cause.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to partner in developing this with a doctor who works at San Francisco General Hospital. She is a trainer in motivational interviewing, which is a technique that was developed by two clinical psychologists who were helping people who had addiction issues. And they found that the traditional doctor telling someone, you need to stop smoking, you need to stop drinking, it's going to kill you, it didn't work very well. Whereas if they took an approach, the non-judgmental curiosity with them, they were able to try to elicit from the patient themselves what, if anything, they didn't like so much about drinking. What did they like most about it? Should I get more information? Have you ever tried quitting? What prevented you from stopping? That this approach, if somebody said, that smoking was a way to relieve their stress, but it made them cough a lot and they wish they could run around with their grandchildren. Like right there, you've identified something like, oh, there's a little kernel of reason why they might want to change. And so you might want to zero in on, oh, well, if you could play more with your grandchildren, what would you do? Oh, you would go for long walks with them.
I guess that goes back to what you had already said earlier in the interview when you're talking to someone about politics, when you're talking politics with strangers.
Yes.
And they say, I disagree or I don't vote, then you would kind of draw it out of them. Yes. So would that be a motivational interviewing technique to say, oh, what would you do if you became the governor or the president?
Absolutely. And there's this thing that they call change talk versus sustained talk. So sustained talk is nothing ever changes. It's all worthless and there's no point in voting. But if they have sometimes sprinkled in there's a little bit of change talk, like the schools used to be a lot better. Back when I was growing up, they really taught you how to read and write. But these days, and so if you were in charge, if you were the superintendent of schools, it sounds like you would do this to make the school system better. That's why if there's ways to elicit these priorities, you get to see like how they would want things to be different. And then that can help eventually lead to a kind of segueing into the elections and how that could be a piece of making that change talk a reality.
And I think it also gets people thinking about solutions. It helps for us to have solutions in our own head that we can talk about and try to bring to fruition and test out.
100%. And I think what's most important is that people are highly motivated by their own priorities. So that's why I think it's more important to figure out what's important to them and then try to connect that rather than me starting out with the laundry list of priorities, because I have no idea if any of those are going to land. And if they have more investment in it personally, then they can kind of make the connection like, oh, okay, I see, I want this for my kid. And therefore, if I vote, that maybe that's a higher likelihood of happening.
Yeah. Jacki, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add on that, which I found really helpful from your motivational interviewing, was the reflective part. Because when people say something, then you do the reflective, oh, I heard you, and you highlight the thing that they just said. It kind of crystallizes it for them, because sometimes we just talk out loud and we're sorting things out for ourselves. By being an active listener and reflecting what you're saying, you're helping them be really clear. And then maybe they will take action on that item. So I thought that was really powerful as the other piece of it.
We're probably going to have a whole podcast episode on this, but being that you're in the realm of canvassing and phone banking, and we have this really important prop 50 coming up
Mhm.
in November.
Mhm.
Is there anything that you want to say about that?
Yes. Well, it's interesting. Full disclosure, when I first heard about the special election, I was not super excited just because of the racist history of gerrymandering. And I can understand why people have mixed feelings about it. And I realized that this is like an act of self-defense, really, because Texas and other states are going to change the rules sort of, midway through the decade. Also, it's a very complicated issue to explain to folks. And so trying to break it down into simple but not simplistic terms. I haven't had the chance to talk to people in the Central Valley about it yet, but I think what I would, ask them about is what do they care about or how do they feel about the way things are going or what would they change? And right now, Medicaid cuts are going to be huge in that community and trying to explain like how that just squeaked through the Congress. And if we had had a few more votes in the House of Representatives, they would have been able to block it, but we didn't. And we want to be able to take that back. And also to explain that rather than Trump being this all powerful overlord, this is a page out of Anat Shenker Osorio, but she talks about him being a weak loser and that the reason he's asked Texas to change their rules is that because he's scared of losing power. And so then he feels like he has to lunge for these desperate techniques, including changing how representatives are elected in states. And that's why he's doing it, because he's actually running scared. And since Texas has rolled over and has agreed to go along with it, this is a way that we can push back, and that it's just for 5 years. It's temporary. And it's important. Right now, it feels like we're in an out of control car hurtling down a mountain. And this ballot measure is like an emergency brake. It would provide some check on that. And some people have said, well, it feels like we have to end democracy to save it. And I think what I would say is, like, I hear what you're saying. And these are really extraordinary times. And I would say, I think that actually Trump and his cohort are already destroying democracy, and that we need to put the brakes on that.
Mhm.
And people might also say, but we had a nonpartisan committee, and that's what we voted. The voters decided on that. And in normal circumstances, I would be fully on board with that. However, these times are really different. And unlike Texas, where it's just the governor and the state legislators, the Republican majority making the changes, the governor and the state legislature is putting this question back to the voters. Like, so I would not try to lecture people or tell them that it's wrong. I would try to affirm what their concerns are, and that maybe I even share some of these concerns, and also try to offer a perspective that, given the unprecedented circumstances we find ourselves in, that maybe it's time for extraordinary measures, which are legal, and they're following a process. It's not just one person making that decision, but that collectively we could make that decision.
I think there's a lot of good points there. Like you said, in Texas, that's a non-democratic process where the president calls the governor and says, give me more seats in the Senate so that the Republicans stay in power. And so they redraw the lines. Versus in California, what they're trying to do is respond, but trying to do it in a legal fashion and with the will of the people. So to get out there and explain that it's not just redrawing the lines and that's it, but this is a temporary redraw and it's going to revert back to the previous maps once this is over. And then going back to your motivational interviewing, maybe say, how would you respond? What would you say is an alternative to Prop 50 to be able to protect our democracy?
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that's been helpful, because this question came up, I did a training right after the special election was announced, and somebody who used to be a Republican and is now independent was raising these concerns. And and I tried to validate what she said. And I also said, this only goes into effect if other states lead with this. So it's only triggered if other states are trying to change their lines. But we're not going to initiate that process. So it's different than what's happening. And I think that helped her feel a little bit better about moving forward with that.
This has all been fantastic information. Jacki, did you have any closing questions or comments?
Just thank you so much, Elizabeth. You do great work. You're inspiring and fun, and hopefully, this will connect more people to engage and have the courage. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I really do hope that people give themselves the gift of at least trying out with strangers about politics, because it's not only necessary, but it helps to create that sense of hope. And just the last thing I want to say is, people sometimes say, well, what gives you hope in these hard times? And hope is not something we find, but I think it's something that we create, and we create it together. And one of the best ways that I found of doing that is by taking that risk to go outside my comfort zone and to connect with strangers and to really build those connections in the community, one conversation at a time.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. And we really hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow us and share this episode and let us know what's on your mind. We have an email at courageiscontagiousIMP@gmail.com. Until next time, remember, we are stronger together.